Greetings, everyone. All right, I wanted to go ahead and just start off by going over one of the technologies that we're going to be using during this class. It's going to be called Kami, and then also I'm going to go over one of the rubrics for some of your narrative writing. I just want to be clear that Kami it's usually really straightforward, but it can have some difficulties with it. So if you have any issues working with it, please let me know so we can figure something out. But what I really want to do is just show you how to use Kami and kind of what I'm looking for when we're doing our creative writing pieces. Now, it's going to be a little bit different for each piece, but I figured I would use the narrative piece to begin. So firstly, as you can see, I've got my rubric here on the right-hand side, and then over here, when I'm grading through your papers, what I'm probably going to be looking at periodically is I'll put summaries at the bottom, but I'm basically just going to go through and see if I can see everything I'm looking for. So if I'm looking for the content and the structure, right, I mean, if you want full points, the thing I'm looking for here is that the writing is several paragraphs long, which it looks like it is. So that's already good there. Cohesive, I'll read through and just make sure that it makes sense. And by cohesion, I mean that it all lines together. You know, if I'm looking at one paragraph and the next paragraph, it doesn't make any sense and I don't know how you got there, you're probably going to get marked down for that. And then it includes some creative elements. And I'll point some of those out here. So just looking at this first paragraph, right? So here, this is what I mean by a creative description, right? I talk about, in this thing that I wrote a long time ago, I talk about, you know, the cigarette haze. It was a fog. I could race cars through it. It was hazardous conditions. You know, I viewed it as an obstacle. That's kind of a creative way of describing just cigarette smoke, right? So that's what I mean by something that's kind of creative. It adds a little bit of embellishment. It makes it kind of more imaginative, more engaging. So as I'm looking through here and reading here, I would look here and I go, great. So it's got creative elements, and I'd look for another, at least two more. I'm going to make sure that it's cohesive, and as I read through, I can tell you it is, at least enough that I would give it full credit. I might make some comments about other things you could do to make some revisions here and there, but all in all, I would give this full marks for at least the content and the structure because of the way that it's told. So now looking through at narration and flow, this is something that's pretty straightforward. The first thing I want you to do is just try and do stuff in chronological order. I know that there are different ways you can write this. I know you could bounce around or you could do different types of narrators, but for this specific purpose, for the narrative piece, I really want you to write chronologically. Flashbacks are fine. I get they can be important, but I'd like to get used to that linear progression of writing. And then, of course, is it well organized? Is it engaging? Vivid just really means descriptive. Like, are you saying, oh, it was blue? Are you describing the shade of blue? Does it look like an ocean kind of blue or the sky blue? Little things like that just create some more vividness, and they also help demonstrate that creativity. It's the same thing. Some of these may look like they double up, and they do, to be honest. As long as you are using things, metaphors, similes, things that make it feel creative and a little more out there, I'm going to give you credit for that, right? I'm not here to bog you down there. The biggest thing about this, though, if you want full points, it needs to be clear who the narrator is. If you're writing this, when it says, you know, I'm assuming that it is you. If at any point that it changes, I'm going to be confused who the narrator is if suddenly it's told from a different perspective. So whether you're writing as yourself or as the third person observer who's talking about everything that's happening in the world, just make sure once you pick the path you want to take that you stay on that path. Again, make sure that's written in chronological order. This one technically is. This one uses a flashback because we're talking about how I am as a kid, and then it does bounce forward a lot later because I'm talking about what I would do, and then later how I'm suddenly at a friend's house thinking about how these kids are having a childhood. But it still works because at least it starts in my past and then moves forward. Technically, I could still do flashbacks here, but I would be hesitant because then it can get really confusing really quickly, so I would avoid that. Again, I try to highlight differently. I'm sorry I don't have a key. I do my best to at least try and keep them separated so it can be clear. You know, little stuff in red is just simple little mechanic stuff that I'm going to notice. Again, as long as it's minor, you're still going to get mostly full points. And since this was a draft, I'm not going to mark you down, but I would at least notify it and let you know what's going on so that we can move forward from there. So going back to narration flow there real quick as you go through. So it is in chronological order. There is some creativity. When I'm looking through here, I notice that I have kind of a message or a story I'm trying to tell. I did make some notes here, right here, like this is a great example of flow. See, I noticed that this paragraph is out of place. You know, I join my mama parties, but I never mentioned it before. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for when I talk about if it makes sense, if it's written in the correct order, if things are being tied together. It doesn't flow very well if this didn't come up, and I might even make a note under content structure that this doesn't work as well. But again, I'm not going to ding you a bunch of points for that. I'm just going to note it. But if I saw this in the final draft, I would probably dock you down a point under your narration and flow. So the one thing I will notice, so down here, I did say you have to include dialogue. Now, when I'm looking through here, I have pretty minimal dialogue. And that being said, it does relate to the story itself. But this is something that if I were grading myself, I would probably mark it down, and I would say, it does have dialogue. It can be conversational, but there's really not a lot, and it kind of adds to the story. But it would have been great to have seen more dialogue and to see more engagement and more speech that does help add to either the creativity of the story or really helps impact the story by kind of showing instead of telling, as we've talked about before. So this is something that I would mark down, and I think I made a comment at it at the bottom as well. Diction is something that it can be kind of tough, especially if you don't know a ton of words, and that's fine. But like one thing I noted here, look at the amount of times I use the word cigarette. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I've got 10 uses of the word cigarette in just a handful of paragraphs. That's a little bit much. This is something that I would note like, hey, maybe there's a way that you don't have to use the word cigarette, but you could describe it without using it, right? I mean, you could get rid of cigarette here and just talk about the haze since you are talking about the cigarettes before. Or you could change this to talk about just different brands of cigarettes and then maybe change this to something else. I mean, this is something that I would just try to work with as best you can just because it will feel repetitive and sometimes it can be a little jarring to see the same word so many times. So again, I would mark myself down. I would say that some of my words were great, but I use so many times that I use the word cigarette that it kind of bogged it down. So these are things that you're going to want to look for. Please just try and pay attention to overusing words. I'm never going to mark you down a ton if you use a bunch of words, especially if we've touched base and it just makes sense to do. But do your best to try and be a little more versatile with your word selection. And then, of course, as you noted in red here, I am talking about the mechanics, so simple spelling stuff, past tenses. Sometimes I may notice little things like here. I just obviously forgot to finish the sentence. It just sort of stops. So that's something that obviously I probably didn't mean to do, but there it is. So now that we've kind of gone over the rubric, and again, when you're doing drafts, I'm going to give you full credit as long as you at least made an attempt and delivered stuff. I'm not here looking for something that's entirely polished and a Shakespearean level. I just want you to get the creative process out there, get your thoughts onto paper, and then we will revise, which is a really important part of the creative process. Because once you've got the thoughts down, you can identify areas where you can be more creative. And as we start, I will be a little more obvious with areas that I think could use creativity. But as we progress, I will offer you less and less specific comments on that because I really want you to be able to try and identify those areas for yourselves without relying on me so much. But of course, I'm going to give you plenty of tools to do that. So the one big thing about this, and I will tell you, is if you do have a question or anything you need, I can access this at any time, and so can you. So even if we're not on Zoom or a call, you can just shoot me a message, and I can still look at this at any point in time and give you immediate feedback that you can then log in and see, which is going to be really helpful as we move on and revise, because I know for some of you, especially if you do sports, it can be really difficult to work on it right away after class, or even sometimes if you get bogged down and you're trying to work on it in the morning. Just whenever you can get the time to do this and ask for edits, please just let me know so that way I can log in and I can check it out. I will try to check these at least every other day, but I do have other classes, so it could be difficult, and I just want to be honest and forthcoming about that. So this is it in a nutshell. I'm now going to go through just some of the other stuff you can do for yourself. So if you want, you can do little markups where you can highlight areas that maybe you want to improve, and you can use your own kind of color coding system if you would like. Once you've highlighted, of course, you can add a comment to it, or you can just undo the highlight because maybe that's not what you want. Another thing you can do, like I said, you've had the comments, you can add other text. So obviously that's how I added the text box here, and you can make little notes, but I find comments are probably easier than making a whole text box. I've never done this. I guess you could draw if you're feeling really creative or fun. If you wanted to think of an idea, or maybe you realized that you were like, "Oh, I'd like to be creative, and I'd like to, talk more about how do I be creative drawing a." Forgive me for my atrocious drawing skills. I'm sure some of you are way better. A plane, right? Since I talk about them. Of course, that's not going to be something that I would do because obviously it doesn't work for me. But for a lot of you, it might be nice to put some colors or shapes. And then, of course, if you're a little bit sad about what you made and it doesn't look good, you can just erase it. Um, Eventually, at some point, I would like to be able to add media. However, we don't have that yet, but we will have another technology that we're using that will let you use media and add elements to that, but that'll come at a later time. So really what I want to just emphasize is this is just a really clever and creative way so that we can work together to kind of work on these. I'll also have opportunities for classmates to join on Kami and help work with these, which would be great. But a lot of that's also going to take place somewhere else when we're doing feedback. So just for now, just know this is the main area that I would like you to write your papers in, that I would like you to kind of put your thoughts in. If you even just leave thoughts in the comments, I will try and read and respond to those and see if I can help you jumpstart some ideas. So do your best to try to make this engaging. You really are going to get out of this what you put into it. So again, this is pretty much it. So if you have any questions, let me know. But just remember the big things I'm looking for. If you keep following that structure, you're going to do great. If your narration has a good flow and it's just following a linear progression in chronological order, you've got this. Dialogue can be difficult, so talk with me about it if you're having issues or your classmates, but it's something that I do expect you to do, and it's something that's going to be important to add to your work, so do your best to try and do this. Diction is something that I would like you guys to get better at. I find that your choice of words has a significant impact on how the reader perceives your reading, so really look at your words when you're revising and consider, are there stronger words I can use? Are there ways that I can show instead of tell? Are there adjectives or verbs that I can add to this? Or can I, instead of saying blue, use a specific type of blue? Can I talk more turquoise or a shade of blue that's reminiscent of pick something, right? You don't have to get too fancy, but I just want you to try to push the boundaries of what you're capable of in regards to your word choice and vocabulary. And then lastly, mechanics. Again, this is something that everyone will struggle with. I've done this for years, and even I struggle with it because when you're reading your own work, it's really difficult to identify your own mistakes. So when it comes time to this, please have a classmate read it or someone you know, family member, friend, whoever it may be, have them go over it because they're going to be able to see these way easier than you are since they're not working with your work and it's going to stand out to them. So that's everything. So I hope that makes sense. A lot of these same principles are going to apply when we're writing poems. Same idea. You're going to follow the same rubric, a similar rubric, sorry, that you'll use for poems or when we're doing other works. And that's going to be it. So again, if you have any questions, please let me know. But otherwise, I hope this was really helpful.